Okay, we've all been talking about Trump, and you blame the brand culture for his arrival, but isn't the truth really that he was known as a man on The Apprentice at firing people, and that's what people in Middle America wanted. They want the whole lot fired, and he did it. It doesn't matter who replaced them. It doesn't matter what they don't. He got rid of the past.
Well, maybe they thought that, but they certainly haven't gotten rid of that whole model. But absolutely, he tapped into this anti-establishment feeling that is not just in the United States, but around the world, a feeling that people have been betrayed by their elites, by political elites, by corporate elites. And yeah, the guy who made his name on the world stage by firing people and by promising also to lift up a few people on that golden elevator up to the sky, stepped in and used all the tools of branding, of marketing, of wrestling, of professional wrestling. He turned his rallies into a weird cross between a World Wrestling Federation match and...
I was at some of those rallies, yeah. and I was in Middle America too, yeah. and they were isolated, alienated, under-resourced people. Mm-hmm. They have living standards which are below our own and below many countries in Europe. The death rate, life expectancy is 5 years lower than Greece, where people smoke quite heavily. I mean, you know, this
Death
is...
by despair, they're being called by sociologists.
Yeah, but how do you reach them? You're very good at talking in your book and analyze a great analysis, and also your activism is attractive, but it's attractive to a sort of liberal elite. It's not surely going to fire up the people who voted for him. Well,
you know, many of the people who voted for Trump in this electoral cycle, not all of them, but a good slice of them voted for Obama in 2012 and 2008. It is possible to reach them, but they have lost faith with the project of, elite power. And they wanted to raise a middle finger, and they did that. I think it is possible to reach them. I don't think it's possible to reach all of Trump's voters, but there's also millions and millions of Americans, more than voted for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, who didn't vote at all. So I think there needs to be a political project in the United States that is exciting, that reaches non-voters, because as bad as Trump's voters have it, and I agree with you, that they are losing economic power in a system which is becoming more economically precarious, Trump's voters are not the most vulnerable in the U.S. economy. They're more in the middle. And the people who are really losing out don't have any political voice whatsoever.
Well, I accept that. But at the same time, there's the whole question of how you offer them something. For example, don't you think that Trump will self-destruct himself in the end, in the sense that 22 million people are going to suffer from the loss of Obamacare? Mm-hmm. That's going to change a lot of votes.
It'll change some, but I think it's really going to depend on whether or not the Democrats are able to offer something else that meets people's needs. And, you know, I'm honestly worried about it, because there are a lot of people in the U.S. who are trying to enter into the opening created by Trump and say, let's have a system like the NHS, except well-funded. You know, the U.S. healthcare system, as you know, is extraordinary. They spend so much money, and they don't offer healthcare to everyone in the country by any means. So there has been this huge push to finally get universal public health care, what in the states they call single payer. In California, it's the Democrats that blocked it.
Our guest here is Naomi Klein, writer, activist. New book, No Is Not Enough. Great analysis of that man and his effect. But let's just talk about the effect for a moment, because he hasn't been that successful. I mean, some wild sort of presidential orders and the rest of it, but at the end of the day, although the Paris Climate Accord and there are other things which are at risk, he hasn't actually done anything yet.
Well, I think they are moving forward with an attack on the regulatory infrastructure in the United States, particularly the environmental infrastructure. And part of this is because so much of what Obama did, he did by executive order, which makes it very easy to undo. He doesn't need Congress. So if you look at what Scott Pruitt has managed to do as head of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, he's actually done a huge amount, but it's not getting any media attention, because how is it supposed to compete with the Trump show? You know, in the 80s, Trump said in an interview with Playboy, the show is Trump, and it's sold out everywhere. And so all the media attention is focused on the scandals he generates every day. Right now, it's his war with CNN, but of course, there's always Russia. And And I think he's actually getting a lot done. And if he manages to get his tax plan through, this is the biggest tax break we've seen since Reagan.
Do you think he'll survive a full term?
Well, I think the idea of counting on him self-destructing or counting on this impeachment strategy is very, very dangerous. The reason why I called the book "No is Not Enough" is because I think Democrats really have to have an offer to voters.
But you don't really sense that he enjoys the job. I mean, you don't think there's a possibility he may just walk away?
He may well, and if the Democrats do win back the House in 2018, and they are in a position to impeach him, he may well walk away at that point. But what I'm worried about is that they seem to be putting all their eggs in this strategy of positioning themselves as the impeachment party. Vote for us because we'll get rid of Trump, instead of vote for us along the lines of what Jeremy Corbyn did in this country, putting forward a manifesto that captured the imagination of a huge numbers of voters because it held out the actual possibility of a better life, meeting daily needs, free education.
But the trouble is, in reality, Corbyn and Bernie Sanders lost. And they both played the same cards.
Well, Corbyn managed to get a lot further than any of the pundits, any of the experts predicted. He did something, as you know, completely historic in this country in terms of the surge that he saw. So I think what we did see is proof of concept that when you lead with ideas, it is possible to engage non-voters. If he had had more time, if he hadn't been starting from such a depressed point, and we could talk a lot about the role of the media in getting him to that point, and the role of the Labour Party in getting him to that point.
But I don't know to what extent
I think he'll be your next Prime Minister, John. That's my prediction.
No, there has to be. I mean, the problem is there is a weariness of the disintegration of the political class in both countries.
Well, I see a lot of hope emerging when policies are put forward that are bold. I think we've been living in the legacy of Reaganism and Thatcherism, and the sturdiest part of that project was not just Ronald Reagan saying that the 9 most dangerous words in the English language are "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Think about that in the context of Katrina. Think about it in the context of Grenfell Tower, right? People are actually ready for there to be a functioning government that actually is able to help people and improve daily life. But the sturdiest part of the project was Thatcher's, was there is no alternative. And it's the spell of that message is finally starting to wear off, and people are starting to believe that they might be able to build something better. And considering that this country gave the world there is no alternative, how fitting for that to emerge here.
So what if you fail? What if there is no? I mean, we look at Macron, for example. No, I mean, supposing, I mean, if this doesn't change and populism continues to rise up, and it's evident, as you point out in your book, in many different places. But if it continues, what many people fear of America is that if Middle America doesn't get attended to, guns will sort it out.
Look, I believe there's a moral responsibility to claim back some of that economic populism from the right. I think that.
Give me an example.
Well, the Sanders campaign. I do believe that if Bernie had run directly against Trump,
I mean a sort of attractive measure which would say to the people in Middle America, the future is yours.
Universal public health care, free education, a 21st century jobs program that is going to create 1 million jobs, getting off fossil fuels, and investing in transit, renewables, efficiency, making sure they're unionized jobs. Because one of the things that's happening now is workers are being asked to give up well-paying unionized jobs in fossil fuel-heavy industries in exchange for a $13 an hour job that is non-union in the wind sector. So this moment is really about connecting the dots between labor rights, between the needs of our planet. And that's why I say, it's not about me winning or losing. We are on the precipice here, not least because of climate change. So there has to be a bold agenda that connects the dots. And I think that the agenda that for a long time has positioned itself as safe, as pragmatic, is proving itself to be dangerous because it isn't a match for the Donald Trumps of this world.
Let's just come ashore here to the United Kingdom. And you mentioned Grenfell Tower just now. You've been out there. What do you make of what's happened?
I mean, it's one of the most haunting sights I've ever seen. It reminded me more than anything of a war zone in terms of just the building itself and the heat at which the temperature at which it burned.
It has a horrible resonance with 9/11. It sort of has that haunting stump.
But there's something about this catastrophe, this crime scene, whatever you want to call it, that I think embodies the crisis of our era, where this systematic neglect of the people inside and the investment in image and facade, right? This cost-benefit analysis, this discounting of human life, it was at the heart of the Katrina catastrophe, right? The warning after warning, fix the levees that were ignored, in part because it was poor Black people on the other side of the levees.
Here, to some extent, it also exposes the whole question of what is to be done about social housing, about publicly provided housing. And I just wondered, is there a state in America that has cracked this, that has managed, in fact, somehow to produce social housing on any scale?
Well, the war on affordable housing is global. This is part of the crisis of this moment, is just the inability to afford a decent place to live in so many major cities, in London, in New York, in San Francisco. I live in Canada, in Toronto, in Vancouver. It's completely out of control. And it does remind me of Katrina, because there was this moment where it was a feeling like maybe this will be a wake-up call, that of course we need a government that functions. Even the very far-right pundits in the United States, when Katrina happened, I remember one in particular wrote this column saying, "This is our Berlin Wall." When there is a crisis, we need big government to ride to the rescue.
It is extraordinary, because I was at Katrina as well, and it was very clear to us that obviously everybody knew the national resources failed completely.
But what ended up happening is they ended up demolishing.
All that.
They were nowhere.
And that actually was exactly the same story here at Grenfell. It was days before anybody got organized.
But I think that the political forces were different at that moment than they are here in the UK, because in the US, it ended up being an opportunity to further attack the public sphere. New Orleans now has the most privatized school system in the United States. Huge public housing projects were demolished that sustained minimal flood damage just because they were on valuable pieces of real estate. So it became an opportunity for even more rapid gentrification. And when I was talking to residents in the area,
just for a moment, for people who don't know, are you saying basically New Orleans became, as it were, cleansed of working people's homes?
Oh yeah, I mean, and it happened because people weren't there to protect their interests. Because if you remember, people were boarded onto planes and buses and given one-way tickets, so they weren't able to protect their schools and their homes and their communities from this process. What I write about in the book is that when Donald Trump appointed Mike Pence as his vice president, I remembered that it was Mike Pence who was chair of the Republican study group at the time that chaired this meeting, that came up with a wish list of how to rebuild New Orleans, which really meant privatize it. They came up with 32 of what they called free market solutions to Hurricane Katrina, and this was the whole wish list. But I think people here understand that the immediate demand of, don't disperse us. We need to stay in our neighborhood. I think people here learned from Katrina, learned from their own history, know that they have to protect their interests in a moment of crisis like this. And when I was in New Orleans...
but just before you go on, because unfortunately we've got about 2 more minutes something, I just want to ask you about your activist solutions.
Yeah.
And I want to know, you see, I think many people in Europe are looking for a third force. I mean, some centrists think Macron's the answer. But I mean, that kind of a solution where you get a whole new lot of people in and the rest of it. But you don't seem to be interested in a third way. You seem to be interested in resurrecting people who've already lost.
Well, I'm not sure what that means exactly.
Well, I mean if you take Bernie Sanders, who did fight a wonderful campaign,
I don't think it's about turning back the clock. I think we need an economic model that is very different than the one we had in the 1970s, not least because that was an economic model that treated the Earth's resources as if they were infinite. That was pretty bad for the environment on many levels. What I'm interested in is connecting the dots between all of these overlapping crises and coming up with integrated solutions. So there is a way to radically lower our emissions in a way that creates huge numbers of unionized jobs, that doesn't leave workers behind and throw them on the dustbin of history, and that also in North America, at least, begins to heal the wounds that date back to the founding of our countries. Which
what about inequality? I mean, here, the bosses, I mean, right up in the top 1%, earn 128. That's 128 times what the average worker earned. It used to be about 15 years ago, 40%.
Well, that's how we pay for it. We have to go where the money is.
But then the people leave and go and live somewhere else. And take their money with them.
Well, maybe part of what we need to do is a lot of this needs to happen in different countries at the same time. One of the things that I write about in the book is a project I've been involved in called The Leap. And if people are interested, they can go to the website, theleap.org. And this is a plan for redistributing wealth, responding to climate change, closing the inequality gap, dealing with racial injustice, gender injustice. It's an integrated solution. It's not a laundry list. It's not turning back the clock to some utopia that never was. And it's also not waiting for a messianic figure to lead us there.